run a market research company and a debating company. So I'm always bringing people together to discuss issues of concern to us all. And one issue that is of concern to us all is social media and how to leverage the power of online citizens. 4 very varying panel members from 4 different countries, I'm very pleased to say, and I'm looking forward to hearing from them, and then of course to throwing it open to the floor and to hearing from you. So let's start straight away with someone who is the UK Group Chairman of Havas Worldwide, which is one of the 5 big global networks in advertising and in marketing in the world. She's also the co-founder of the not-for-profit organisation One Young World, which is a global platform for young leaders. And more countries have registered than any other youth gathering, apart from the Olympic Games. So, a great welcome to Kate Robertson.
Thank you, Carol, and thank all of you for being here. I'm honoured indeed to be here. I'd like to get straight in and refer you back to the exact topic that we're talking about, how to leverage the power of the online citizen. Just want to be very specific about that. And just refer back to a very well-attended session last night on the warlord Cone, or Coney, as we in the West call him, the head of the Lord's Resistance Army in Uganda, and of course the Coney campaign, the biggest of the online social media activist campaigns, biggest in terms of number. Now, you will know that campaign has been criticized, so let's talk about the how-to. One of the points raised about that campaign continuously was the quality and emotional impact of the video against Coney. There's no doubt that that's true. I'm from a marketing background. Marketing is my job. And yes, we are very good at that. And to that end, very good at communications, whether it's marketing communications or videos about Coney. So that campaign comes up for criticism from the NGO community, from Ugandans themselves, and we had Kevin Dorisboy here last night, the last journalist known to have interviewed Coney herself. She was certainly emphatically against the Coney campaign. But I want to steer away from that and talk about this how-to. So quality of video. Clearly the aim of that video was to raise awareness of the Coney issue worldwide. It achieved that. It raised funds. The people speaking last night, and they are experts on the particular subject, believe that Coney will not be caught because of that campaign, will not be have his activities in any way curtailed, and therefore they believe that that campaign is a failure. So I want to talk just about 2 mass social media activism campaigns, ones you may be aware of or not. The first I'd like to refer you to is the campaign by a young Colombian man, Oscar Morales, the campaign called Millones Voces contra el FARC, which was a Facebook page he set up in his bedroom with no intention other than registering his disgust as a young Colombian against the FARC guerrilla operation. That campaign, in its time, and it's 4 or 5 years ago now, became the most successful campaign in human history. Successful in terms of its numbers online, different from the Coney campaign in terms of the numbers that they managed to put onto the street. In 14 weeks, they raised 12 million Facebook likes, but they also, at the end of that 14 weeks, managed to put 2 million Colombians onto streets in protest around the world against the FARC. Now, that campaign's object in its first instance was not clear. All it said was 1 million voices against the FARC, just voices against. Like people against Coney, what have you got? A lot of numbers on Facebook, nothing happens. Turned into a protest. By accident, the fact that so many Colombian, not worldwide, Colombian voices were raised against a guerrilla movement claiming to be a movement of the people, what happened was the FARC were effectively, by that campaign, delegitimized. It was clear to all Colombians. This was not a romantic Che Guevara type of affair, men of the people, the concerns of the people. It's just a bunch of rubbishy thugs. The FARC today, their numbers are down by 53%. Over 40,000 of them have been processed through what Kevin last night was calling purification camps. And effectively, the days of the FARC are over. So a successful campaign. Interesting with Coney and Milione Voces, the common thing here, and we're talking about how to leverage the power of the online citizen, the common thing here is going negative. What you need to know about gathering numbers of these online citizens, gathering big numbers, is be against something. These citizens are far more inclined to gather in great numbers to be against something than to be for something. It's interesting. And the other one I would mention, of course, is the We Are All Khaled Said, Wael Ghanim's Facebook campaign in Egypt at the start of the Egyptian Revolution. Again here, a successful campaign. Raised over 800,000 engaged Facebook users in its first phase. Wael himself says the Christmas before the start of the Arab Spring, over 800,000 people, many of them saying on the Facebook page, you know what, we're wasting our time. Nothing's going to happen to the regime. I don't know why I spend all day sitting on this Facebook page. I'm going to leave it. Wael says the impact of the news from Tunisia was electrifying. The minute this Facebook community on We Are All Khaled Said realized that something was actually going to happen in Tunisia, the numbers on We Are All Khaled Said Facebook page were going up. In one day, at one point, they were over 6 million. So here, like Coney, although not in as big a numbers as Coney, the online citizens came to the forum and came to express solidarity. We Are All Khaled Said was for Khaled Said. Of course, it was against the regime. They were being against something. But interestingly, Milione Voces contra el FARC and We Are All Khaled Said. Numbers were impacted by the nexus between that Facebook page's activity and the mainstream media. Without what we call today the mainstream or traditional media, those campaigns would never ever have raised the numbers they did. The same is for Coney. Without Oprah Winfrey, those numbers would have been less. So, all of these campaigns have had slightly different intent, slightly different consequences. There are many Egyptians of a certain age who would argue that the Egyptian revolution has not been a good thing. And all of these stories have yet to play themselves out. So, in shorthand, going negative brings greater numbers, but there has to be an understanding between the social media denizens and the people of the mainstream media, which means you, the journalists. And I can tell you for a fact, unless an online campaign gathers numbers in the many millions, journalists are not interested in the story. So when we argue that journalists should be paying attention to smaller campaigns where their intent is better crafted and the one-on-one relationship between the people and the result is better found and better created, and you often hear that argument, I promise you, for good reason, and I'm not complaining, I'm simply stating a fact, for good reason, journalists from the mainstream media are not interested in campaigns that don't deliver the numbers. So it's a double game, and that has to be understood. You can't, or I don't reasonably expect a journalist to want to or be permitted to write a story in the mainstream media about a Facebook campaign that has 200 people involved. It's not interesting. When it's 100 million, like a Coney, hey, the mainstream media are there. It is a story. But there is absolutely no doubt in my mind that the notion that the social media numbers run away by themselves and change things by themselves without the nexus, the friendship and support of the mainstream media is simply not true. So it's all those things. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Kate.
You've got to press your button, Carol.
Press my button. We've got on to a very good start, and if you didn't notice, Kate is from South Africa. Now we'll go to a journalist who is living and works in Italy, a distinguished journalist who I think will pick up one or two of the points that Kate brought up. She's the former managing editor of lastampa.it, which she started herself in 1999. It's sort of, she brings together on the paper's website the newspaper, the internet, and blogs. And she's now the social media editor of La Stampa, and says that no other social media editor in traditional and national newspapers in Italy. So it's very much a new role and one that she's pioneering. She tells us that Italy's role in the changing media scene and how it's going to affect newspapers and how they respond to discussions. And she's very, very much a campaigner herself, I know, interested in citizens' rights and interested in just the issues that Kate's been talking about. So a great welcome to Anna Massara.
Thank you, and I apologize if I'm speaking in English. But I see that the audience is all English-speaking. Nobody's wearing headphones, so that's a good sign, and I'm very happy about that. It's a new thing in Italy. I mean, there's actually there's a university in Italy that actually wanted to propose that all classes would be in English, and there's been a big discussion on social media about that, whether it's a good thing or not, whether it means that we are evolving or not, and what happens to our language. Anyways, thank you very much to everybody. I'm here to speak about my new role, because it's kind of a strange thing to be a social media editor. In traditional media in Italy, nobody has that role. Actually, there are social media editors in smaller organizations in Italy, but all big newspapers abroad have social media editors. I was nominated 2 months ago, and I went to the Social Media Week in New York and spent some time at the New York Times to figure out what they're doing as social media editors. And one thing is one thing for sure is that my role is a temporary role. I mean, all journalists are now on social media, and they're learning really quickly what social media is. I mean, Twitter is becoming really popular among journalists. It's actually the arena of Italian journalists is Twitter, more than any other platform. Facebook is more a platform for personal communications. Twitter is definitely for news. So I'm noticing that I would have to define my role within the next year or two at the most, but I think pretty soon it will happen what happened at the New York Times, where the first social media editor decided to go back to regular journalism because there was no need for her anymore. Actually, they split up the roles. There are 15 social media editors at the New York Times, and their age could be my daughter's age. I mean, they're like half my age. So the first thing I say is that it's a role for young people, and I feel challenged to keep young, I guess, to keep up with the competition. My new role is to coordinate the presence of the newspaper on social media. My editor-in-chief asked me to make the presence of La Stampa on social media more coherent, because we were there as single journalists, but not as a newspaper, first of all, as a website. And so all the news that we publish are now retweeted and shared on all the platforms of social media. We are present on Facebook, we are present on G+, on Pinterest, on Instagram, on Storyfy, and slowly we're discovering new social media because there's so many, and we have to evaluate every time whether it's worth going there, because the data shows that in Italy the most used social media are Facebook and Twitter and maybe a little bit of G+, and a little bit of Storyfy, but the rest are very small. Pinterest is very interesting for pictures, wonderful, but they have to resolve the problem of copyright, which is really big, because if people share pictures that are stolen from the internet, it's a violation of copyright, and a lot of that is happening on Pinterest, and Pinterest was growing really fast, and then for the past 2 months or so, it's starting to slow down. So we're wondering if Pinterest will have a future. Instagram is wonderful for sharing pictures, and now it's been bought by Facebook, so it's part of Facebook, really. And the problem of these platforms is that they're all closed platforms. They're not open platforms, so it's not open journalism. And what I think the future should be and will be, because that's really successful, is open journalism, open data. And I think the experiment of The Guardian, which for me is sort of like the point of reference, is what The Guardian has been doing online, is really wonderful. But they are also having a hard time coping with all the competition, because let's face it, traditional media, even the best, even foreign newspapers that we look up to, like The Guardian, are having a really hard time surviving with all this social media and with all this new media online that are really providing an incredible amount of competition for very little money, actually for free, most of it. And so I have the feeling that the future will be free information, and we are paid journalists, and somehow our business model is not fitting in. So we don't have much of a future right now if we want to keep being paid for what we're doing. So our real challenge is, how do we get paid for what we do? And how will people keep people interest in our role? So, this whole, I'm not going to, tell you anything new. I mean, this whole festival of journalism is based on that. I mean, you see all the meetings that are going on are all about trying to figure that out. And there's foundations like ProPublica, and in Italy there's RF, which are raising money to pay for investigative journalism. There are crowdfunding platforms for asking to get money to be paid to make investigative journalism happen. Otherwise, most smaller groups, blogs, and new organizations are sprouting up and competing with us, and the best wins, really. I mean, it gets the most attention, the most audience. We live on advertising revenues, and so my role is strange because I'm sort of in the middle between marketing and journalism, because I have to promote my newspaper on social media, which means, so it's a promotional job, and it's kind of weird. For the first time I have to deal with trying to get a lot of audience on my newspaper. It wasn't my concern, and now it's really my concern is, to get a lot of audience, and which, in turn means more advertising, more revenues for the paper, and more chances to survive in this very competitive environment. And so it's kind of annoying to have to deal with money, but I mean, we have to finally face the fact that if we want to survive, we have to know, the reality. I mean, the reason we are having a hard time surviving is that there is no money left for newspapers, and I'm really actually proud to be able to contribute and try to raise that money. So I'm promoting our stories on social media and our journalists, and I'm trying to tell them also how to use social media at best. We wrote down even some rules, some kind of sort of an ethical guide of how to use social media, and also a practical guide, instructions on how they work and how they function. And so we even have a new social network within the company that we use to share information on how best to use all this media. And that's a new thing that we're doing. My other important role is to search for news on social media and then bring them back, and news that are worth researching. And so I bring them back to the newspaper and say, the buzz on Twitter right now is on this, so maybe we should be writing about this. We should be researching and see if it's an important story or not, and verify the stories, because as it's been said, I mean, today Rodota gave a huge speech about this, about the fact that journalism now is, first it gets published and then it gets verified with social media. So that's the new reality, is that the news is published everywhere, but we don't really know if it's verified or not. So our role really is to verify things that have been published first, and be quick and very fast at doing that. So everything has become really fast and very quick. And on a personal note, I have to say that my life has become so multitasking that I hardly am able to walk without tweeting and without checking messages that I'm getting, or without taking pictures and doing everything live. Right now we're live tweeting from Perugia, and we started a live tweet on La Stampa Live, which is a real challenge, because it means, of course, it makes our job much more intense and continuous 24 hours a day. It's very hard to stop and be able to think it over. In the old days, it was really nice to sort of sit around and talk and then think things over. Now everything is very stressful. So, of course, investments in this are really important. I mean, publishers need to invest and hire new people, young people, to do this kind of stuff. But I think also we can actually gather strength from citizen journalists, from netizens, from people who are our readers and who can give us for free, because they're passionate about journalism. They can give us for free a lot of their time and a lot of their participation. And sometimes their contributions are wonderful, and they they turn out to be wonderful journalists themselves, and to be freelance journalists that we might want to hire one day. And I would like to show you, I know we have very little time, and so I would like to cut down on my speech, and I would like to show you a short video.
Can we say it at the end? Because,
yes.
I think it's about
so,
2 minutes long, and it might just cut out.
Okay, so I have a short video to show you that it's a video that was done by through a contest. We launched a digital contest online on the website of La Stampa, asking citizen journalists to send to do their own video reporting and send us a video of a story for them that's very important for them to be published. We chose sifted through thousands of stories, and eventually we had 3 winners, and they won a prize. We gave them a prize in money, and also to work with us and do a new story. And and we published the videos a few months ago, and now the new stories were published today on the website of La Stampa, and the website is www.lastampa.it/premio digitale. And I'm not on the website here, so I have the video, and I can put it online at the end of our speeches. So before you leave, you can watch it if you want, because it's a beautiful video, and it's done by a freelance journalist who's actually here in the room.
Thank you
today.
very, very much indeed, Anna. Well, that's a very, very comprehensive. Thank you. Right, now we turn to someone who's half Chinese, half Australian, a diplomat. He's a diplomat in the Caribbean at St Kitts and Nevis, a UN representative on matters of environment and sustainable development. He's founder of WeForest.com, which restores the environment by bringing in and encouraging corporations to plant trees. His first public company, DavNet, was a telecommunications carrier. It was the fastest capital growth company in the history of Australia. And when he sold it, and it went onto the stock exchange in 1999, when he exited, it was worth $1.2 billion US. He's now a venture partner with SOS Ventures, recently invested online journalism space owns a chunk of SiliconRepublic.com, plus the revolutionary news service Storyful.com, which he's going to invest in further. Co-founder of Coder Dojo, the movement to teach younger people between 7 and 17 how to be creative digitally. And they've got 100 locations worldwide, and tomorrow they're launching their first Coder Dojo in Florence. So a man of many parts, a welcome to Bill Leo.
Thank you. Sheep don't paint. We invest in media companies, particularly Silicon Republic, and Storyful was just mentioned. The CEO of Silicon Republic told me recently that Twitter actually has brought their audience onto their editorial desk. That is one of the ways to leverage social media, but sheep don't paint. When you look at a lot of the online campaigns, and I have run several, you see many, many numbers. But if you have an entire audience of slacktivists or robots, you're not going to get any impact. It's not until the mainstream media actually, as Kate said, takes on a social media campaign that social media campaign gets the oxygen it really needs. Now, when I look at Silicon Republic, the journalists of Silicon Republic, I see, are very well supported by social media, but not as an advertising system, not as a way of broadcasting their message more effectively. They're a mainstream media site. What happens for them with social media, and what I encourage you all to do, is to leverage the tool of social media in the unexpected ways. I've always viewed journalism as an art, not a science. And like all great art, it can be supported by great tools. One of the reasons that we invested in Storyful.com was because that is a tool that allows you not just to get breaking news from Twitter, but it is curated by journalists such that you can get to the truth of the story quickly. And I think that social media is an incredibly powerful tool, not just for finding the news, but for verifying it, and for increasing and enhancing the quality of your art. It was said a minute ago, what is the future for journalists? Well, if you are a great storyteller, and you tell authentic and interesting stories, I think you have a great future. Because one thing that social media does is it creates a lot of noise. It creates a lot of hoof prints in the sand. But it doesn't create great stories. Great stories require craft. When I look at technology, some people are instinctively afraid of it because technology is seductive. You see the photographer who refuses to use digital media because it's somehow inauthentic. I think you have to grow up and you have to actually look at technology as something that can enhance your art. When you look at something on Twitter and you take it at face value, that is not enhancing your art. That is heading you down the track of the sheep. But when you look at Twitter and you look at Wikipedia and you look at YouTube as starting points, and then you conduct your own investigation using those tools to more easily and quickly get to the source, get to the authentic truth, and then tell that story with your art, that creates a great future for you. One of the things, though, that I am terrified of is that we are leaving people behind. And it's not the people you expect. The people you expect to be left behind by the digital world are those that have no access to it, or those that have they're aged too old to have become digital natives. We hear this term digital natives all the time. The problem is that I would count myself as a digital native more than I would count some of the kids that I meet these days. I would call them Facebook natives. They have no idea about the rest of the internet, but they are digitally native. You need to be able to have a broad brush. You need to be able to have access to all the tools. And I think it's our young people that are actually being disenfranchised while we don't even know it. They are growing up in walled gardens. They are not learning how to actually interact with the technology. When I was 12 and interacted with my first computer, you had to know how to program, or it was a really expensive paperweight. Today I see videos on YouTube of 2-year-olds interacting with iPads. And while I see that the first time they encounter a Windows PC, it's going to be a big disappointment as they tap the screen and nothing happens, I also see that they are growing up in a controlled space. A group of us in Cork in Ireland got together recently, just late last year, and looking at this, we founded an initiative. Myself and my co-founder, James Welton, who's 19, he had started a computer movement, and I joined him. We call it Coder Dojo. Coder is in programmer, dojo is in temple of learning, much like a martial arts dojo. What do? Coder Dojo teaches kids from 7 to 17 how to program computers. Because how you program a computer is how you get truly literate. It's how you become a digital creative for real. It's how you bring art to computers. And it's the intersection of the art and social media, the intersection of the art and computers, where I think the most value is created. How does this impact you as journalists? Well, my view is that in this information age, you need to get smarter. You need to recruit teams. You need young programmers to come with you on your journey, to find out the truth, to sift through the billions and billions of bytes of data and find the authentic story and then enhance it with your art. And you're not going to do that if you just have an iPad. You're going to need better tools. And we have not even begun to scratch the surface of what a true digital news agency is going to look like. But I can promise you it's going to involve programmers. And if it doesn't involve programmers, it's going to have no soul. And as I said before, we need creative young talent. We need to have that creative young talent be able to manipulate and bend the digital realm to its will. And we need them to learn and work with you to tell those stories. Because sheep don't paint. Thanks very much.
Very well done, Bill. Thank you very much indeed. And thinking still of stories and how to tell a good story, welcome to our last speaker on the platform this afternoon, who is Scottish, by the way. She's chairman of the digital agency Think, and they've just built and in fact launched only last week the whole online world of Harry Potter by that wonderful storyteller J.K. Rowling. And she's really bringing the world of Harry Potter to a whole new generation. And so far, in just this last week, 6 million people have signed up. It's Pottermore. And in order to start your Pottermore journey, you need, which is really, I suppose, an online interactive book with new writing from J.K. Rowling, you need to sign up first, and you have to say whether or not you are magical. And then you can enter into this world. Also, alongside this, this has been launched also through, of course, Think. It's the really first digital publishing first in the fact that the only way you can buy her books is online. So the books go direct from the author to the readers, bypassing people such, of course, as Amazon. But we'll hear more about that, I'm sure. Our speaker is also the founder of horsesmouth.co.uk, which is a social network for informal mentoring, where everyone can give and can gain what I think she describes as the social networking for a social purpose and with a social purpose. She's a director on the board of the big company in the UK, Channel 4 television, and she's founder of an advertising company which was built into one of the top 5 advertising companies, Rainey, Kelly, Campbell and Wolfe, which she sold to WPP. So again, a woman who I admire greatly. A great welcome to MT Rainey.
Picking up on what my fellow panelists have said, which I guess is a good thing since we haven't really conferred. But I really want to talk about perhaps laddering up some of the issues and a little bit of a history lesson, because when you're as old as me, you earn the right to give a little bit of a history lesson because you can see what's happening now in the context of what's happened before. So I spent, I think as Carol said, most of my career in advertising on the agency side, making commercials, advising big clients on their communication strategy, etc. And this is another industry, obviously, which has been completely disrupted and transformed by the internet, and one with which the viable future of journalism is certainly still entwined. So it's very interesting. We have a lot of common interests. But if you've been around a while like me, quite old, the current digital world and all that it entails and enables and promises actually seems to me to be the third wave of a democratizing revolution that started in the late 70s and has gone through 3 big technological tipping points to where we find ourselves now. So I'll briefly say why I think that's true and what they are. It's not news, but it's really interesting if you've lived through them all quite closely, as I have. And believe me, I've been listening to this narrative of revolution in media, the death of this and the decline of that, since I first worked with Apple. I was lucky enough to work with Apple in California in 1983 and 1984 to launch the Macintosh. And believe it or not, the term personal computing then was an oxymoron. That's how far away we've come. So the first wave really was the liberation of computing power from the few to the many, the rise of personal computing, largely in the work environments at this point, and the increase in Moore's law microchip processing power that fueled that growth through the 80s and 90s. The second tipping point was the early internet, the first days of the internet, what's now called Web 1, where content and commerce migrated online. And this really was the era dominated by the beginnings and the rise of Google, certainly Amazon, Wikipedia, and endless corporate and institutional brochureware. This was really the kind of flat content era of the internet, the first generation of the internet, where everything you wanted and everything you wanted to know was available at the click of a button. But this was essentially still a producer-to-consumer transaction and was really about doing the same things in a new way. The third tipping point is the one we're in now, and that is, which we're saying, the evolution of the social web, the shareable web, currently being accelerated by vastly improved broadband speeds and mobile technologies. Now, this one really is a truth imprisoned in a cliche, because this really is a revolution, because it finally unlocks and unleashes unused and untapped human capital to create new social capital. That's really what this part of the third wave of the internet revolution is doing, and that's what makes it genuinely almost a completion of a revolution. Never say completion, because there's always going to be something new. But it's really this new social capital, which represents a massive new power asset in our world, all of our worlds, as well as most certainly threats to the ways we have as professionals traditionally operated, and certainly to the financial models which sustain those operations. The golden thread I've clung to, having been in this close to technology businesses and communication and media for 30 years, is that in all these years of changes, bubbles, bursts, booms, is that people shape technology and not vice versa. What we do with new stuff always reflects what we already know about what it means to be human. So as in life, so online, for better or for worse. We still behave as we do as human beings. So we're saying, because we're all human, an explosion of new ways and new reasons to share, create, collaborate, relate, affiliate, aggregate, cooperate, and take collective action outside of the framework of, and certainly without the overhead of, traditional institutions. What we are saying there, I think, is the humanization of the internet. And what we are also saying, I think, perhaps more controversially, is a change in the whole dialectic of consumerism. Consumers are being turned back into people. We are players, not just payers. And I think this is the real change that's happening. The key thing about this whole world that we're talking about at this conference, is that it's not a parallel universe from which institutions, the state, brands, companies, the professional media, and indeed the traditional media are excluded, and in which they cannot participate. Far from it, au contraire. But we are all now in a vast new ecosystem which will and must develop its own rules of engagements and transparency of transactions. And it is this period of adjustment that we're all rather uncomfortably in right now. So we have to ask ourselves, as people and as professionals, what do we value? What will we pay for or trade in order to get what we value? We have power, we have a voice now, so we want respect, but we also have responsibilities. What have we lost by living so much of our lives online? What must we now work harder or subsidize to maintain? How important is privacy, really? What is my identity? How important is my identity to my authenticity? And I really believe these are two different things. What are friends for? Who do I trust? What do I like? What do I care about? These are all the things we've been dealing with at this conference, and they're questions we should be asking. Specifically for me, I left my career in advertising when it all started to go horribly wrong for the advertising world at the beginning of the social web in around 2005. This was at the dawn of Facebook and before Twitter had been invented, because I saw potential in creating a marketplace for all the wasted wisdom locked up in our hearts and our heads, in the same way that eBay had created a marketplace for unused and unwanted goods that we have locked up in our attics and our garages. If we could use the techniques of the social web to safely connect individual people with other individual people who had faced the same choices, the same challenges, or who could inspire each other through their achievements, then we really could create a new social capital from unused human capital and create a genuine force for good. So Horse's Mouth, which is the social network that Carol referred to, is for informal one-to-one mentoring on the important issues in life, from careers, employability, relationships, health, and family, the sort of stuff that's important to us all. It now has about 50,000 fully profiled mentors, just people like you and I with something to say and a story to tell and a desire to give something back. It's hosted over 1 million mentoring relationships and generated about 60,000 compelling, inspiring, and moving life stories. Another subject of journalism is the stuff of life, all published by users and free to read online. So I like to say about Horse's Mouth that it's where the wisdom of crowds meets the kindness of strangers. And if Facebook is for the friends you need, the friends you have, then Horse's Mouth is for the friends you need. But in my experience with this over the past few years, as well as this long experience over 30 years, There are three things, just to finish, that I feel pretty strongly about going into this new era. Firstly, I think that we must work hard and actively to use the web for good. I don't think that good stuff should be a byproduct of what happens commercially. I think we need to actively design for the web to be good. I feel very strongly about that, and that Horse's Mouth is something that we invest in, which is why it's not a commercial operation, one of the big intractables, but we need to invest in making it something good happen online. Secondly, whatever we have to do in this new world, however scary and threatening things appear on the margins, the bogeymen of the internet, we must preserve the ability, I think, to remain anonymous online. Pseudonymity is very important for the vulnerable, whether this is a dissident in a police state, as Kate was talking about, or a captain of industry struggling with an alcohol problem his family don't know about, which is the kind of thing we see on Horse's Mouth. News organizations using Facebook apps are encouraging a sphere of public discourse which suppresses the voices of the vulnerable. This is quite controversial, but I think it's true. Some people will not tell their story or advance their point of view if they have to use, if they are compelled to use their real names or their real identities. The moral panic over cyberbullying and trolling, which has to be managed, is not best addressed by curbing the ability to speak freely anonymously. The requirement for full identity disclosure is a bullying tactic by those who only want you for your data. Identifiers are important. There are lots of reasons why being able to identify that X user is the same user as Y user over here, those are important, much more important than identity online per se. Third thing, and finally, we do, and I think I'm echoing all my colleagues here, we do need to keep the internet open. Don't let's disappear into silos or worlds as Facebook and indeed Apple to some extent would have us do. Let's not fall into the app trap, or we will kill the potential and ruin the promise of what the internet could become. So hopefully that will stimulate some debate.
Right, well, 4 very different stories, but 4 all very much interlinking. So now it's over to you, the audience. I hope you've got questions. It could be comments or questions. Address them to one particular person or just a general one. And if you could tell us who you are and just a teeny-weeny bit of your background, if you're a student or something you know about or don't know about, that would be helpful. And the microphone will come to you. Do I have anyone who wants to ask a question? Oh.
Always be first to ask a question.
There's a man back there. Wait for your microphone.
Please stand up. They want me to stand up too. They want me to stand up too. Clive Edwards, I'm the head of current affairs at the BBC. I was heartened to discover that in this new world there is a place for the old mainstream media, and that indeed you rely on us to some extent to spread the word in an appropriate way. I suppose the question it kind of begs is, it's a big news story right now when you get millions of people following any campaign, but will that eventually simply tail off? Will it just be what we're used to, that lots of people follow these campaigns? And secondly, is there a danger that it might also open the door to what some would call mob rule, that where, frankly, being against something becomes a very powerful tool to go what you might say is the wrong way?
I'm not sure who you were looking at, but I'm going to start with Kate and maybe go on. Kate.
Choose.
I think it's extraordinarily difficult, and I think the discussion that we listened to with Coney last night absolutely points that up. You know, there's over 100 million people, in inverted commas, invested in that as a social media campaign. Some of whom actually gave money. Then you heard the NGO community last night are questioning where that money went, what Invisible Minds is doing with that money. I think the thing that's difficult is when I think people of your and my generation talk about mob rule, and certainly as an African from South Africa, mob rule in the mid-80s meant you got a tie put around your neck and you got burnt to death. I mean, mob rule was a French Revolution, I'm going to cut off your head, a real violent thing. So that kind of mob rule, when the social media denizens gather in those kind of great numbers, what happens to that story? It does tail off without the mainstream media, unless there is actually physical action. So the Coney campaign gets criticized because they didn't put people on the streets. Some of the campaigns I was talking about actually put people on the streets. So I think that we don't know where that ends up. I mean, there are people in Egypt, as I say, of a certain age who would say that the occupation and continued attempts at occupation of Tahrir Square are about mob rule, and certainly there have been some extremely unpleasant things going on there. But that mob rule is the old kind of mob rule that you and I would have known about. It's not the social media thing. The mob rule side of it is some of the stuff that MT was alluding to, is trolling and those kind of strange activities, which I find fascinating because these things are all new and we don't actually know. I think even the big social media campaigns, we don't know where they end up. The Coney thing, if you listen last night, is tailing off. Is it?
Thank you. Bill?
Just want to address one part of what you said. You asked the question, will these stories of big numbers trail off? And I hope they do. I hope you guys stop being lazy and pick numbers as a headline. That's just wrong. There are great people out there doing great things every day, and you can access them. You don't even have to pick up a phone, but it does take a little bit of effort on your part to go and find these great things and then celebrate them. You can bring the numbers to them. You can actually create a story that has more impact than you've ever imagined before. But you've got to go find somebody great. You've got to actually roll up your sleeves and do a bit of investigative journalism. Don't look at the numbers anymore, all right, guys? Come on.
I heard, I was listening to a conference speech the other day where someone described traditional media as having attention deficit disorder. So they go in and they go very large on a big story and then miss the next one, they leave it alone. Whereas digital media have obsessive compulsive disorder. And they go into the detail and they try and recruit. So I didn't know if I actually believed that, but it was quite a nice metaphor. But one of the things, I think what we all feel, I'm sure believe, is that the amplification of these campaigns can be something that new media and the multiplier effects of the new and old media, broadcast media, if you like, operating with some of these campaigns. But the other thing is that what the internet does that we've just never had before is it leaves a trace. So it is possible to maintain campaigns online. You have to work at it, though. That's my point, is these things don't, if you just let things go, if you don't make the effort, if you don't invest, if you don't subsidize, if you don't work hard at maintaining something that's started, then they will just go. So it requires work. It's not a de facto success. But old media certainly, traditional media can certainly amplify and create multipliers. But internet campaigns can be sustained. It takes work.
Thank you. Oh, do you want to say something? Nope. Have we got another question? Oh, good. There's a gentleman there. Microphone, and I think I saw another. Did I see another hand somewhere?
Okay, I want to chat. I'm my former student of the University of Perugia. So generally, we know that media gains money from advertisement in order to survive. So I would like to know the relationship between social media and advertisement. Thank you. The relationship between social media and advertisement.
Tackle that one for us.
That absolutely is the question that everybody on Wall Street, in the city of London, and the streets of Shanghai, everybody is asking, what is that relationship? I think it's a very interesting and a very difficult time for some of the big social media properties. I think if you look at Facebook and what is going on with Facebook as they ready themselves with their IPO, they are looking very carefully at what their revenue model is. Not how many people are actually using Facebook, what's the revenue model. And I think a linear analysis that says that they will earn money from paid advertising in the way that traditional media in some instances have previously done is not necessarily their best model, but it is certainly the model they are pursuing at the moment, and if you're a Facebook user, you will know this. It's a very complicated thing. MT makes a good point about this issue of the social media sites and businesses that only want your data. I think it is a complex thing. The social media fishers have shown over the last 4 years that they are very quick to swim away when they don't like the way their data is being used. So that model, the old model applied to social media, the reality is at the moment that we don't know. MT and I were having a discussion last night about who of the big social media sites and search engines is really on the dark side and just trying to use the data. My argument would be that the social media or search engine that has the most technology and the most data, you have to hope, as MT says, that this is to the good, because should it turn to the dark side, it's going to control our lives. But it's the question at the moment, and I don't believe any of the social media models or search engines know within 12 months or 24 months which of them are going to be making money out of advertising. I don't believe those models are clear.
It's true to say, though, that there is a rhetoric around internet advertising that has a lot of traction, which is that in the past, and one of the things that advertisers, the big companies like the Coca-Colas and the McDonald's, all the big companies used to hate about having to spend lots of money on television, was that so much of it was wasted because it wasn't targeting the people that might use their products. So wastage was the problem for the old model of advertising if you were an advertiser. I mean, we always argued there's no such thing as wastage, but for people who are selling to a particular demographic, a particular thing, then of course there's wastage in broadcast media or large-scale media. But what the internet, the promise of the internet and the hope of advertising in the internet is that because there's now a return path of people know where you are and what your preferences are, what's called behavioral targeting, that there will be no wastage. The advertisers will only target those people who are broadly in the market for their products at the time when they might need them. So this promise of the internet advertising is actually quite heavily articulated, but it depends on us as consumers, as people, being willing to open up our data, our life online, to the search engines, to the social networks, to the data trawlers. It depends on it depends on us colluding with that. So there is a model for advertising going forward, but it's entirely unproven. There's a strong rhetoric for it, but the model isn't proven. But it's definitely there. I mean, all the money that was being spent in media, a lot of it has migrated online. The problem with that is it hasn't supported the quality of content that the previous money supported. So we do have a big missing deficit in terms of advertising.
Bill?
I think that another aspect of the question that you asked is editorial independence. So in a traditional media company that is also advertising, there's always a bit of a question about, is there editorial independence? Can you say, if you're advertising Coca-Cola, can you say, report on something bad about Coca-Cola if they account for a quarter of your advertising budget? And I think that a lot of media companies have come to terms with that, dealt with that over the years. I think on the internet, there's far less content being created by some of these companies. The content's being created elsewhere, so it's less of a problem. But I think the problem's still there. In terms of the independence, say, of the platform, you certainly see some platforms don't run some software. Some platforms don't allow some content. And there is a really dark possibility in terms of search. Because right now, your search results are all edited. All your search results, if you go to Google and your browser is known to Google, then Google will do its level best to serve you the results it thinks that you want. It's called the search bubble. Now, there is very little to prevent that search bubble starting to ignore certain products that you might want. There's actually no law against it. There might be an antitrust problem, but there's no law that I can see. So, yeah, I think you do need to have this inquiry, and I think people need to get smart again about looking at all of these things from the perspective of, well, where is the influence being applied?
Is that anybody else? One question here. Is there any other question? 2, 3. Good. This is wonderful. But okay, the gentleman over here. Thank you very much. Who I know well because he's my husband.
Gives a game away. Richard Lindley, television journalist. Is the gap between those who are adopting social media growing or narrowing? Is everybody going to be doing it, or is the gap actually going to be growing?
Good. Keep that one. Let's the microphone to who else had the hand up? Good. Okay. Over here.
Hello. I would like to ask
who are you? Who are you?
Okay, I'm Miriam. I'm a student.
Stand up.
I'm a student, and I write for a little web magazine called losgamato.it. And what I would like to know is, in your opinion, what is the role of the social media in the movement of Occupy Wall Street?
Good.
Thank you.
Do you want to fancy that one, Anna?
Sure, but maybe we can finish the round of questions.
Oh, right then. Okay. So,
so that we all...
I've got 4. I've got to come in with you. Wonderful. Okay.
Anna, University of Finance, Russia. I would like to ask that the problem is now journalists can use some new materials, can use, for example, they can add some new details, not true details, to attract the attention of public. And so it can lead to the fact that social media can be used in the way they are not supposed to be used.
Right.
And so it will be dangerous for the public, for the democracy, etc., etc. So it will be a new way to influence the public's attention. And
Good.
Can I say one comment on that one?
Put your thing on.
I would just have one small answer to that. Truth has an uncomfortable way of coming out.
Good. Okay. Thank you. And was there another hand? Or have I got all my hands now? Good. Okay then. So I'm going to go with. I think. Can you? You going to take which one? You're going to take?
I'll take the Occupy Wall Street one. And yes, I agree that truth has an uncomfortable way, but also a very brilliant way of coming out, and it's wonderful. That's what social media is all about, really, is that it brings out the truth. It's really easy to get everybody to participate looking for the truth. They're all investigating, and they're all, for us, that since we're journalists, it's wonderful to throw out the question. If we don't know, if we're not able to search ourselves, I mean, and we fail in our job as journalists, we are actually helped by, if we use social media in the right way and we ask them to participate in our work, we get a lot of help from it. So it's really good for us to open up to social media because of that, and we shouldn't be scared of that competition. It actually makes us better journalists. And yes, social media actually is what helped the movement Occupy Wall Street be talked about. I mean, I think Occupy Wall Street started on social media, and then it was picked up by traditional media. Once it was out there and it was powerful, I mean, it was unavoidable. I mean, let's face it, it was a movement that was uncomfortable, and it took no time for it to take over on Twitter, and they were very well organized on social media, and the flash mobs were organized on social media, and they were very successful thanks to them. So I think it was created on social media. And now it's everywhere, it's all over, but because it's so intertwined. And there's books about Occupy Wall Street, but without social media, I don't think it would have existed. Just like many of the other movements that are going. I mean, the Arab Spring is started on social media as well, and I think all these movements we wouldn't know about if social media hadn't been there at the right time, which means people there at the right moment, being there with their smartphone, reporting on the story without waiting for the journalists to arrive, and giving actually to the journalists the material to follow the stories later on. But we came later on. We weren't there on the spot when it happened.
Thank you. Memsi, do you want to pick up the gap?
Yeah, I don't know the statistics, unfortunately, on whether the gap is widening or narrowing, but in general, the more and more people, a wider and wider demographics are becoming engaged online in social media. However, we do see a couple of things. So one, there is a bit of a fatigue factor. So people, older people who, there was a significant increase in the UK, I only know about the UK, a significant increase in the number of people aged 50 plus who were coming online and doing lots of things. But actually, that tailed off a bit because they didn't really find meaningful things to do once they were doing their emails and they're posting their family photographs and receiving things. They weren't finding too many meaningful things to do, which is why I think things like Horse's Mouth, which is really all about the accumulation of wisdom, connections where you can actually have a meaningful dialogue with someone who's a stranger, effectively, is interesting. But the other kind of, so I think, you know, we are definitely living in an era where young people will be more digitally engaged. But I think the real digital exclusion question that is actually more material to the future of the web is really the one that Bill raised about we are not, if we just live in a culture where we just receive applications from a certain amount, you know, a certain amount of manufacturers or a certain amount of brands, we're not really operating in the spirit of the potential of the internet, the open internet. Maybe Bill will say more about that.
Oh, I don't know, he hasn't got much time. Go on then, Bill, just say a quick word.
Can you turn your mic off?
Oh, yes.
So, very quickly, I would suggest that the best software in the world is designed to close the gap for those people who are disenfranchised now. And the danger is that because of the quality of that software, we also create a new gap between us and those who can actually create that software. And so there are, in fact, two gaps. Internet have-nots and internet haves who are in these walled gardens. And one is growing, one is shrinking.
Just quickly, on the gap growing, the most important thing about the closing of that gap is the coming of the mobile web to the continent of Africa. It will change everything for Africa. It is a wonderfully positive development. On Occupy Wall Street, my concern about that would be that as good as the online organization has been, and as much as many of us instinctively support the vague notion, they don't know what they want. Abolish capitalism is not a clear aim. I don't understand what you mean and what you want me to do. And on democracy, the issue is this. Yes, you are right. There is absolutely no doubt in my mind that most social media can and is watched by the state. Whether it's in China, and you know that every page on Renren is watched by the Chinese state, or in the UK government watching the social media during and in the aftermath of last year's riots in the City of London. The fact of the matter is that social media can be watched in ways that we may or may not like, which brings us neatly round to the issue which says that we need to be sure, as MT says, that we are somehow ethically and morally invested in these new developments. Can you imagine a scenario where the person who owned one of these great social media sites or search engines behaved in the way that some of the media moguls in Europe and UK have been behaving? That is the threat. There is glory in this, but yes, you are right. There is absolutely a dark side. It's there.
On that depressing note, or maybe it's an uplifting note, can I say, before I thank our panel, of whom I'm very proud, and you as audience, I think as we just have a very few minutes left, it would be lovely, because it's so pertinent to what's going on now, if Anna could just introduce and show us that one of those videos.
Okay. Yes. The author of the video is here in the room, Giordano Cosso. Can you get up for a second? He's the author, and he won the prize, and he is actually, he will surprise you because he is a wonderful journalist, and we were very proud to publish today this video, which is is the second of the videos that he made for us. It's starting right now. Is it showing?
It's Pour le mois de janvier, c'était un drame très dur. Parce que moi, je portais un bébé. J'ai été à la maternité au moment du secousse. Je me demande à Dieu, que vais-je faire, Seigneur?
Un pays ne peut pas fonctionner sans une vision, sans un projet de société. Donc en gros, c'est ce qu'ils, à l'occasion du 12 janvier, c'est ce qu'ils veulent rappeler à la société. Donc nous avons besoin d'un État capable de reconstruire la nation.
Aujourd'hui marque la deuxième année de ce tremblement de terre qui a vraiment ravagé le pays.
Nous, les étudiants de Nantes, nous croyons qu'il n'y a pas de développement sans émancipation culturelle. Alors, pour transformer la société, on doit agir avec l'art. Parce que l'art peut transformer notre pays.
C'est quoi tout ce bruit? On dirait que c'est le malheur de mon pays qui s'annonce. Malheur sur ma ville, malheur sur ma terre. Malheur est partout. Malheur à vous, hommes politiques.
Après le 12 janvier, il y avait une sorte de solidarité internationale. Certainement, tous les caméras étaient braquées sur Haïti. Mais aujourd'hui, en termes de bilan, on peut dire qu'on n'a rien de positif comme bilan. Rien n'est réalisé en termes de construction.
2 ans après ce tremblement de terre, on avait pas mal de gens perdus, mais maintenant on ne peut pas rester là, on ne peut pas rester à regarder seulement, mais il faut aller de l'avant, il faut dire que la vie ça peut recommencer.
Ce que je souhaite, j'espère avoir un enfant, un homme de talent, un grand homme. J'aimerais qu'il devienne un grand homme pour Haïti. Joyeux anniversaire.
It's been 2 years since the earthquake in Haiti, and Giordano Costa was there during the earthquake, and he reported the earthquake really well, and he won a prize for that video that he made. It was a huge reporting, and he made a website of it, and now he just did this small video for us, remembering the earthquake and the fact that the media are forgetting Haiti, and Haiti is still to be reconstructed. He's here, and he can tell you about it later if you want. I mean, we have to close, I think, now.
Thank you very much indeed. Congratulations once more. Thank you very much indeed. And if I can just say again, thank you. I think each of our panel members have brought such terrifically different stories. Thank you very much, Dee. Thank you for being here and for your questions.
Thank you.